Hello, I am your instructor, Scott Walker. This presentation is entitled Ethics Axioms. It's in support of the preface section of the textbook Fire Service Ethics. In it, you will be introduced to a series of ethical truisms or axioms that pertain both to the professional life of a firefighter and the firefighter's personal life. The term ethical attachment is used frequently throughout the textbook Fire Service Ethics. It refers to ethical obligation. As the reader moves through the material, he or she may come to question the assumption of moral culpability or ethical responsibility. An important concept in the text is that without ethical responsibility or moral culpability, ethics is essentially irrelevant. Conversely, where moral or ethical culpability exists, then there is ethical attachment and hence ethical obligation. The axioms are the basis for determining moral or ethical culpability. The axioms regarding personal ethics rest heavily on the combined principles of the three philosophic approaches to ethics. They include first, the pursuit of virtue, as explained by Aristotle. Secondly is the pursuit of best consequence, or utilitarianism. And third, there is the concept of personal responsibility, or duty, as expressed by Immanuel Kant. The amalgamation particularly rests on the works of, again, Aristotle, John Stuart Mill, who was one of the leading philosophers proposing utilitarianism, and Immanuel Kant. All of these authors are explained in detail in chapter 4 of the text. I, as the author, have sort of synthesized their work into what I believe to be some simple principles that are easily understood and universally applicable to personal life. The axioms regarding professional ethics, which are treated separately in this presentation, are more or less my assertions based on an amalgamation of ethical principles relative to the fire service. And they are rooted in what I believe to be common sense. In both cases, the axioms that I present here don't represent groundbreaking ideas. In the best traditions of the fire service, I made no attempt to reinvent the wheel. Rather, I took proven ideas and concepts that are widely accepted and applied them to the fire service. As we go through the axioms, it is important to understand that three things will happen. First, you will be given the axiom. Second, you'll be given the rationale as to why the axiom is applicable. Just as importantly is there will be a discussion of consequences or assumptions based upon that axiom. And this is important, especially in the professional ethics, because it kind of makes statements as to what ethical attachments or moral culpabilities actually exist in a particular incident. And to the best of my knowledge, that has never been done in print before. Certainly, there are ethical codes out there. One of them is by the Firefighters Union, the International Association of Firefighters. There is a similar firefighter code of ethics put out by the International Association of Fire Chiefs. And there are several other ethical codes produced by various departments. But they all tend to essentially articulate attitudes and values, not particular ethical responsibilities or culpabilities. And that's why I think that these axioms are worth reviewing in detail. We'll begin with the axioms for personal ethics. Axiom 1 is do no harm, or by inaction allow harm to come to others. The quality of human life and the progress of the human race depends on personal safety and cooperation. Absent these, there is brutality and anarchy. The protection and physical safety is one of the cohesive reasons why we form society and come together as a people. There is safety in numbers. Fundamental to that truth is the restriction of harming others for personal gain or having a complete disregard for the welfare of others with whom we have contact and live with. We live in a society that provides us with safety, quality of life, and a potential for human development. By accepting those benefits, we have a social obligation to extend the same benefits to other members of the society. Now, there are certain implications associated with that truth or that rationale. And the first is it's unethical to cause physical or emotional or even financial harm to another for personal gain. In other words, you can't go out and hurt others for no other reason than to benefit yourself. Secondly, living within a larger society infers a social contract for mutual well-being. As such, we as members of society have at least some responsibility for the welfare of others. Again, one of the principal reasons that societies exist is for mutual protection and mutual welfare. Third, social obligation towards other human beings extend beyond actively hurting each other. Members of society have a duty to minimize harm to others when possible. Axiom 2, seek justice. Fairness, and to a greater extent justice, are essential to the concept of ethics. Ethics is rooted in human relationships, and the acceptance that others have a right to thrive and pursue happiness is the defining nature of healthy relationships. The implications of that simple truth are as follows. The fair allocation of resources is fundamental to ethical behavior. In short, greed is contrary to ethical behavior. To take what you do not need and to take at the expense of others is inherently unfair and hence unjust. Give others that which they are entitled to. If someone does a job that they are supposed to be paid for, then we have an ethical obligation to pay them. It is a social contract. All individuals should be given the equal opportunity to succeed. That does not imply that everyone should be given the same benefits or the same rewards. It does say that everyone should be given an equal chance. With human relationships comes responsibilities and obligations. That's just the deal that we make when we enter into relationships. Fairness and justice require good faith efforts to keep promises, meet obligations, honor responsibilities, and be truthful. Finally, authority and privilege have attendant responsibilities. It is inherently unethical to take without equal contribution. This is true in any fundamental relationship. Axiom 3, contribute to the common good. Harking back to the last axiom, we can assert that to take without contributing is to use others for personal gain. Using others, this is Immanuel Kant's second ethical mandate, To use others for personal gain is inherently unethical. So, except for those living in isolation where ethics is irrelevant, the quality of life is dependent upon mutual cooperation. Because we benefit from membership in a community, we are obligated to contribute to it. Again, we get benefit from society, hence we have an obligation to contribute positively to society. There are certain attendant ethical implications associated with this. First, ethics decisions should consider the general welfare. It is inherently greedy, childish, and selfish to only consider our own welfare when deciding action. Individual action that affects others should be consistent with society's needs for group behavior. In other words, you should act the way that you want everyone else to act. This is also one of Immanuel Kant's categorical imperatives. Each individual benefits from advances in culture made by the previous generations. We have today the highest standard of living of any generation that has ever preceded us. We are also generally healthier. We live longer, and we have a higher quality of life throughout old age. As such, each of us has an obligation to contribute to the culture for future generations. Axiom 4, respect the humanity of others. This was Immanuel Kant's first categorical imperative. By benefit of birth, each human being is endowed with the right to dignity, self-determination, and equality. This is the founding principle of American government. It starts with the Declaration of Independence and is re-established and reaffirmed in our Constitution. Our body of law respects that each person as a human being is endowed with certain inalienable rights. Dignity, self-determination, and equality are primary to happiness, to the pursuit of happiness and the pursuit of success. The implications of that are as follows. Each of us has a responsibility to respect the human rights of others. If we cannot extend, as a general population, the rights of others, protect the rights of others, then our own rights are, of course, risked. We sink into anarchy. Lying and deception show both a lack of personal integrity and they demonstrate a disregard for the dignity of others. To lie to others, to cheat others, to misrepresent ideas to others is to degrade their humanity. It is an insult to their dignity. They are seen as ends to a means, as opposed to individual sentient beings with personal rights. Any form of discrimination which negatively impacts someone without cause is inherently unethical. Any action which degrades human dignity or is intended to diminish perceived value of another's life is inherently unethical. Every individual is obligated to treat others as they would themselves be treated. This is the golden rule of the Bible. This is fundamental to Christianity. It is fundamental to all the major religions. It is also inherently true in any social contract binding any society together. It is the impetus for most of our laws. Let us now switch to ethical axioms for professional ethics. Axiom 1. The fire service and its members have an ethical obligation to provide the highest quality public safety services that are possible based on circumstances and funding. The rationale for this is simple. Public safety is the organizational principle behind human society. In particular, it is the organizational principle behind the fire service. It is the fundamental reason we exist. Civilizations cannot grow absent safety and safety of person and property. Consider it. If you are not safe, either physically or your property is not safe, then there is anarchy. There is no possibility for commerce if everyone steals. There is no possibility for art if you have to defend yourself 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Safety and security are the catalyst for the development of society, the development of new knowledge, the development of new technology. All of man's achievements are based on the idea that we organize into societies for mutual safety. The welfare of community members is dependent upon the fire service for the provision of public safety. The fire service's organizational principle, the reason we exist, is to save lives and protect property. Hence, we have an ethical, imperative obligation to uphold a promise where all the implications of dependency are supreme, and everything we do is based on that obligation. The implications are significant. First, fire departments, and by extension the members of the department, have an obligation to act first in the public's interest. Your first loyalty as a firefighter is to saving lives and protecting property. More so than paychecks, more so than workers' rights. We are firefighters for that reason. The fire service exists for the reason of saving lives and protecting property. You are paid to provide that exact service, and hence you're ethically obligated to do it. Fire departments, and by extension its members, have an ethical duty to maintain competency in order to fulfill the promise of service. If your primary responsibility is to save lives and protect property, then you also have a responsibility to be competent to do that job. By accepting a position as a firefighter, an individual accepts the responsibilities and obligations inherent to providing the services of the fire department. Firefighters have an obligation to maintain not only their technical competency, but also their health and physical fitness in order to facilitate the provision of the promise of service. So to recap, you have an obligation first to dedicate yourself to public safety. Second, to be technically competent. Third, you have an obligation to be physically capable, both through mental health, physical health, and general well-being, so that you are able to provide those services. Axiom 2. Firefighters have an ethical obligation to conduct themselves in a manner consistent with trust and faith placed in them by those they serve. The rationale. The fire service exists for the stated purpose of assisting those in need. Because a local fire department is almost always the sole provider of its services, and because of the nature of our services, there is a significant degree of dependency on firefighters by their citizens. They don't have a choice of who to call when they're in trouble. People in need only have us to call. As a result, they are often vulnerable and forced to trust firefighters will act in a way consistent with honoring their trust. As a result, there are certain implications. First, firefighters should act consistently with the general welfare of those requesting their help. Now that sounds simple enough, but every action you take is based on an ethical responsibility to help, not to harm. So if you were, for instance, to tell stories in a bar the day after a run about the horrible living conditions that a hoarder was living in, you're actually violating their trust. They're assuming that you are there to help them, not to spread their shame around town. And by spreading their shame, by telling stories about them, by telling their secrets, you are causing harm to them. And they did not call you to be harmed. They called you to be helped. They trusted that you would be there to make their life better, not worse. Firefighters should provide services equally to everyone, regardless of race, religion, nationality, sexual orientation, social standing, or political affiliation. Again, the public has little choice but to call the fire department. There's only one fire department in town. We are a one-stop shop. We accept tax money from every race, religion, nationality, sexual orientation. We have a social contract with every member of the society. Hence, we have an obligation to provide services equally, fairly, and to the highest of our ability to every member of our community. Firefighters must always respect the dignity, humanity, and reputation of those we serve. Again, any action that we take that causes financial, emotional, or physical harm to others is contrary to our very reason for existence, and it breaks the social contract that we have with the public. We make a promise to protect others. As such, we have an ethical obligation to avoid harming others through action or inaction. Axiom 3. As a government agency, fire departments control and utilize public resources. As so, we have an ethical obligation to manage those resources judiciously and equitably. Whether we're a career department or a volunteer department, fire departments are funded by public money. As such, fire department equipment is owned by the public. We have a fiduciary and ethical responsibility to spend public money judiciously and to maintain public equipment. The ethical implications are as follows. Fire department administrators have an ethical obligation to conservatively budget and expend money. Again, fundamental truth, it's other people's money, and we have an obligation to treat their money that way. As fire departments utilize public resources, the public has a reasonable expectations that fire departments' funds will be used for the public's benefit. Again, everything we buy is in support of the mission. Now, yes, fire departments will buy pots, pans, recliners, and maybe even TVs. Some do, some don't. But even those can be rationalized as being in support of the firefighters in the station who are prepared to respond. But we cannot justify spending money frivolously just for the sole benefit of the firefighter themselves. Any expenditure has to be at least rationalized or can be argued and rationalized as being in the public support. Further implications of Axiom 3. As a public agency utilizing public funds, fire departments have an obligation to hire or admit members fairly. We use public money to pay our firefighters. The fire department is literally owned by the citizens it serves. As a result, every citizen not only has a right to expect fair and equitable access to services, but they also have a right to expect fair and equitable access to employment. Firefighters have an ethical obligation to treat public resources with the highest regard. It is other people's money. This includes protecting it from loss, protecting it from unnecessary damage, and providing proper maintenance. It is unfair to the people writing the checks, the taxpayers, for fire departments to carelessly lose equipment or break equipment. Again, we are spending other people's money. You would not borrow a drill or some other tool from your neighbor and then just lose it or break it because of lack of care. In a sense, we are borrowing other people's tools when we buy things for the fire department. By joining the department, we make a commitment to the department and its procedures, including its purchasing procedures and its maintenance procedures. 4. Each firefighter has a responsibility to the welfare of the department and to its members. As a fire department provides a much needed service on which many depend, whether you are compensated or not, when you join a fire department, you create a covenant with that department to assist in the delivery of those essential services. When you join the fire department, there is an implicit agreement to act in that department's welfare. You are paid or compensated for that very act. To do anything otherwise is deceitful and ethically unfair. Implications. An individual firefighter does not have the right to damage the reputation of the department and, by extension, the reputation of other members of the department. We are a team. We are a family. We are the American Fire Service. Any action you take reflects on all of the other firefighters you work with, and to some extent, firefighters across the country. Also, you enjoy, as an American firefighter, a certain degree of respect. People look up to the fire service. We're one of the most trusted organizations. Firefighters are very often considered local heroes. The reason that exists is because of the hard work and dedication and behavior of those who came before you. You do not have a right to tear down what others have built, nor do you have a right to damage the reputation of others by your action. Each firefighter has an obligation to competency as it contributes to the safety of fellow firefighters. We all know that our work is dangerous. We also all know that we depend on each other to do our jobs. If I take a nozzle into a burning building to make a hit on a fire, I am trusting that the plug man can get water to the apparatus. I am trusting that the apparatus engineer can get water through the pump and down the hose line at the correct pressure. I'm trusting that my company officer is properly directing activities inside the structure. I'm trusting that the assistant chief or battalion chief or whoever the incident commander is competently running the fire scene. I'm trusting that the truck crew will ventilate. We all have our jobs to do, and our safety depends on each other doing our jobs. Firefighting is a team-based exercise requiring competency among all of its members, and as such, each member has a responsibility not only to be competent, but to pass on knowledge, to mentor, to promote professional development. We are raising the next generation of firefighters. You have an obligation to do that. It was done for you. Someone taught you to be a firefighter. You have an obligation to teach and pay it forward. Fire departments deliver services to people desperate for help. As such, it's a reasonable assertion that the mission of the fire service is more important than the individual interest. Sure, we all want to make as much money as we possibly can. Of course, we have an obligation to take care of our family. But by joining the fire department, each of us assumes a responsibility for the continued improvement and welfare of the department. The fire service is bigger than any individual firefighter. Your local fire department is bigger and more important than you are, personally. Every fire department has an obligation to protect you as a firefighter. You have an obligation to contribute your part to the fire service. Axiom 5. Fire officers have an ethical responsibility to fulfill the duties bestowed upon them as a condition of rank. It is inherently unethical to take money, to take a promotion, and the benefits of that promotion and not do the job that you are paid to do. By becoming fire officers, we are granted special authorities that attach special responsibilities. Those responsibilities are unique to supervision. The acceptance of promotion is essentially a contract between the department and the officer to fulfill those duties. Just as if you hired a painter to paint your house, they have an ethical responsibility to paint the house. A fire officer has an ethical responsibility to do their job. As such, firefighters are ethically obligated to act in the public interest by providing emergency services, by providing risk reduction activities, by the responsible management of public resources. In other words, they have an ethical obligation to oversee operations. Firefighters are ethically responsible for the health and safety of the firefighters they supervise. That much is clear. It is a risky job, but risk can be minimized. We need you as an officer to be competent, to make wise decisions. Firefighters trust you. They go where you tell them to go. They do what you tell them to do. You have an obligation to be competent. Fire officers have an ethical obligation to be loyal to their superior officers. They are paid to represent the department's rules and regulations, and by extension, the officers who make them. They have an ethical obligation to support department initiatives, if legal, and department policy, if legal. Even if you don't like a rule, you have the obligation to enforce it. If you're not comfortable with taking responsibility for enforcement of rules, give back the bugles. Successful delivery of public safety requires well-trained, dedicated workforce. Firefighters have a responsibility to teach. They have a responsibility to mentor. I hope you found this presentation useful. The ethical axioms should be reviewed and kept in mind as you move through the book. Again, I refer to ethical attachment and the principles expressed within the axioms repeatedly throughout the text. They are also elemental in dealing with some of the case study questions and some of the questions found in the ethics and action exercises you'll encounter later on in the text. I hope you've enjoyed it. I'd certainly encourage you now to go back and read the preface of the text before going on with any other factors in the class. Have a good evening. I hope you enjoyed the presentation.